Welcome back to another FPL video and podcast. This will be the best wildcard team for Gameweek 16, and this is recorded on Wednesday morning, and there will be Champions League action on Wednesday night, which could be very crucial in terms of updates on Gabriel and Timber. So during the UCL Fantasy Deadline stream, I did cover the latest Arsenal news, and it looks like up to 7 Arsenal players missed training, and that included Thomas Partey, Timber, and Gabriel. So we're definitely going to keep an eye out for if they play against Monaco, and then reassess the situation in a couple of days' time for the upcoming team selection, and most importantly, in the deadline stream, which will be on Saturday. Be sure not to miss it by smashing the like button and subscribing if you're new. Our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 31,000 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below, which includes Drafthound, which you can see on screen, and their wildcard squad includes Kelleher, with Dean Henderson as the backup goalkeeper, Saliba, Howson, and Badiashile, Salah, Palmer, Saka, Enzo Fernandez, and Gordon, with Isak and Cunha up front. They've also got Chris Wood, Ashley Young, and Lacroix on the bench, and some of these options are actually very decent and very low owned, and they've got the potential to push you up the ranks. And I'll be discussing quite a lot of different options though with my own wildcard team. Maybe you prefer the Drafthound one, and that's completely understandable, but I have to say with Kelleher, definitely keep an eye out for him if you own him in FPL as well, because Alisson made a return in a 1-0 victory over Girona on Tuesday night in the Champions League. So I wouldn't be looking to invest in Kelleher right now, and Drafthound will rectify this in terms of predicted lineups, predicted points, and the best wildcard team in the next couple of days. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 103.2 million, but as I always say, it will vary depending on how much value you have tied up in certain players, when you bought them in, the selling prices, and many other factors. But I'll be discussing some alternatives as we go along in each position, and you've got a good feeling by now in terms of certain positions about the pool of players I'd recommend, but it has evolved and changed in certain areas, particularly in the outfield positions. But let's start off with the 2 goalkeepers. The top 5 goalkeepers in FPL hasn't changed, and David Raya is arguably the top dog, but I would be slightly careful with this pick or doubling/tripling up on Arsenal because of the amount of injuries they have, particularly at the back. Tomiyasu and Ben White are ruled out, and in the case of White, he is out for several months. You've also got Timber, Gabriel, Calafiori, who are potentially out for this weekend, and another option, which is Thomas Partey at right back, could also be out, and he missed training on Tuesday night ahead of that Champions League clash against Monaco. Not to mention Zinchenko, who played against Man United and then disappeared. He didn't feature against Fulham, wasn't even in the squad, and he's also doubtful for the next few matches. So Arsenal might have to play the likes of Tierney or Lewis Skelly, maybe even both in the fullback areas, and you've got Kiwior alongside Saliba. Arsenal can still keep a clean sheet against Everton. They've got a brilliant home record against the Toffees, but Everton might smell some blood here and score a goal or two and at least cause some chaos. And in Gameweek 38 last season, these two sides met, and it was a very cagey game for Arsenal with different circumstances as the title was right on the line there. David Raya is still a great option in goal though, but if you want to go a bit cheaper, or maybe you don't trust Arsenal so much defensively, you may want to go for Robert Sanchez instead. The 2 Spaniards are arguably the best goalkeepers in FPL right now, and you may also want to consider Alisson, who is now back from injury. He made 5 saves against Girona. He was arguably man of the match in that game, and I bought him in UCL Fantasy during the deadline stream, and the other options would include Onana and Verbruggen. I wouldn't go for one of those goalkeepers on top of David Raya though. I believe that's too much money spent in this position, and that's why I always recommend a cheap backup goalkeeper, and I still think Fabianski is the best of the lot. Fraser Forster might be under consideration. He's made plenty of saves for Tottenham in the last couple of matches, but as I discussed before in my transfer tips, I would skip him completely because Spurs are woeful defensively. They've got a lot of injury problems of their own, particularly in the back line. Romero is out now for 6 weeks, and they rushed the likes of Romero and Van der Ven back for that Chelsea game, and it just backfired completely. And Fabianski, while he won't get you many clean sheets, at 4.1 million, he still offers great value and can start from time to time. I wanted to do something different with this defensive line this week, and I have kind of cheaped it out and not gone for any premiums, which might be contentious. When I was making this wildcard draft a few days ago and Jurrien Timber wasn't an injury doubt, I did have him alongside Virgil van Dijk, and you could still make that work somehow, especially if you've got more budget available than I do. But Joe Gomez is a nice alternative at a cheaper price point, and for the next 4 to 5 weeks, whilst Konaté is out, I think he can get you plenty of clean sheets, not many attacking returns, if any. He has never scored for Liverpool in his career. Will this be the time where he finally scores? Never say never, but it's very unlikely. I still think Liverpool have the best defence and team in the Premier League so far this season. They're also demonstrating that in the Champions League with another clean sheet, and Joe Gomez started in that game, and he can get a lot of ball recoveries in UCL fantasy. In FPL, unfortunately, you don't get points for that sort of metric, but you can get bonus points, especially in these narrow victories that Liverpool could get in some of these cagey games coming up. And Fulham might not be the easiest, but with the suspension to Bassi and also Liverpool's rest over the weekend with the Merseyside derby being postponed, I just don't see anything other than a Liverpool win, and I'd double or triple up on the Reds. Next up, though, is a defender I haven't covered in quite a while, and that's going to be Lewis Hall. He has been underwhelming in recent weeks, and in terms of Newcastle assets, Isak is by far the best option. There's no debate about it. You might argue for Anthony Gordon in the midfield, and then defensively, it's probably Lewis Hall or nothing. I did like Nick Pope a couple of years ago, but it just hasn't been the same this season, and Newcastle are not reliable defensively, and that's 2 victories since Gameweek 5. One of them was against Arsenal, but they are so inconsistent. They seem to raise their level against the best teams in the country, and then when they're facing maybe opponents they're expected to beat, like Brentford, they're just not able to get that run together or build that consistency. That's a massive concern for Eddie Howe, and Lewis Hall won't be the most reliable. But over the next 2 game weeks, he's got great fixtures on paper, and I wouldn't mind starting him in game week 16 or 17, but not to the same extent, or I wouldn't have enough confidence in him to put him week in, week out in the starting 11, because Newcastle can't be trusted, in my personal opinion. And another defender who averages almost the same number of points per match this season, he doesn't look that enticing as an FPL asset, but I would go for him because of the fixtures until game week 23, and that's going to be Levi Colwill. You might argue, why not Cucurella for 0.6 million more? I just don't believe he justifies that extra 0.6 million. He will get some assists, but in terms of points per match and value, I think Levi Colwill is the best Chelsea defender to invest in. Now, Robert Sanchez will be the ultimate way of covering Chelsea defensively, despite the mistakes he can make, as he showed against Tottenham. But if you're going for David Raya in goal, I think that's completely fine, and it's all about balance and the way you want to invest in each position, and Colwill for me is the best value Chelsea defender, and those fixtures are worth targeting. Next up is another budget option, but he's not going to be 4 million, and the same goes for the 5th choice. So Kirkes does make it again. He didn't keep a clean sheet against Ipswich Town, but an 8 points against Tottenham was very unexpected and also very welcome for those that invested in the Hungarian left-back. He's got a bit of attacking potential about him. In the last 6 game weeks, he's got 2 assists and a goal. I don't expect him to carry on that trajectory, but I think from now until the end of the season, he can get you a few surprising attacking returns and also clean sheets when you least expect it. And when that happens, he's very likely to be in and amongst the bonus points, and he's probably the best Bournemouth asset behind Evanilson at this moment in time. But the 5th and final option won't also be that appealing. He's averaging around 2 points per match as well. But Van Heck has great fixtures for the next couple of game weeks. Then it turns for Brighton momentarily, but I think long term their fixtures are quite solid, and I wouldn't mind a bit of Brighton defensive coverage. And in some of those tougher games, I think Brighton step up and play their best football. A bit similar to Newcastle, they're inconsistent, and against the likes of Leicester and all these teams that maybe you would expect them to beat quite comfortably, they won't really deliver the way you'd want to. But maybe against those big opponents on paper, they can get the job done, and maybe a clean sheet is on the horizon. While the backline I went for might be slightly contentious, I don't think the midfield will be anywhere near as controversial. Mohamed Salah is the best FPL asset in the game by far. He scored a penalty against Girona, and he got 8 points in UCL fantasy. I could see him doing something similar against Fulham this weekend. He's going to be right up there for the captaincy conversation, and I still think it's worth having Salah over Erling Haaland right now if you had to pick one or the other. Some of you might have both alongside Palmer and maybe Saka, but it's all about balance in my opinion, and having enough squad depth during this Christmas period. You might look at my defensive line and think that's not too strong, but I think all of them will do quite well over the next month or two, and they can come in for you and do a job if you get a surprising suspension, or maybe you just get an injury and you want to deal with it internally with the 50-man squad at your disposal. But Salah is a brilliant option still. Liverpool are flying, and the only thing that can stop Mohamed Salah is that Christmas photo that he always posts, and then that downturn in form. That's the only thing I could see, because right now he is scoring and assisting in virtually every single game. The same can definitely be said about a certain Cole Palmer, who delivered 18 points in Game Week 15, and I'll talk about this in the team selection, but spoiler alert, It's one of the only reasons I got a green arrow, and I'm happy I got the captaincy spot on because Saka was a viable alternative and he had that late goal chalked off against Fulham away. Speaking of which, I'd also go for Bukayo Saka. Despite my recent frustrations with him, I bought him against Man United and he has blanked in back-to-back game weeks, and in the meantime I sold Isak and he has been on fire. I still think Saka is in the top 5 captaincy options against Everton, but one factor that won't be discussed enough is that Everton have a very big rest going into the Arsenal game with no match in Game Week 15 and no European football in midweek whilst Arsenal play Monaco on Wednesday night. So those factors could definitely give an advantage to Everton in terms of energy levels, but maybe with match sharpness, form and other factors, you'd give Arsenal the edge, and they've got the quality to demolish Everton on their day, and they've got a brilliant home record against the Toffees. So Saka would be right up there for the captaincy alongside Salah, Palmer and the likes of Isak up front. But I'm also going to go for a Spurs attacker here in Brennan Johnson. He was subbed off in the second half against Chelsea around the 53rd minute mark because of illness, and let's see if he plays against Rangers on Thursday. If he starts that game, I'd be slightly concerned about his minutes and also energy levels heading into that Southampton fixture, and Spurs are capable of losing against the worst team in the Premier League as much as they are capable of being the best teams in the country like Man City away from home. They are that much of a yo-yo club. They can be very inconsistent. They've got some quality players in there, but they struggle to find that consistency. So Brennan Johnson might not be their safest pick, so to speak, in Game Week 16, but he has been very consistent up until this point of this season, and I wouldn't mind having that one Spurs attacker to tackle this Southampton away fixture. And even beyond that, I think they've got a good fixture run and they will bounce back and rise up that Premier League table. I'm also going to go for a budget midfielder though to conclude things in this position, and Morgan Rogers is still, for me, the best option. You might argue Iwobi, but I think after 1 or 2 blanks, you may be tempted to sell him, and I wouldn't invest in Fulham assets against Liverpool away. I think the time would be Game Week 17. I just don't see them getting anything at Anfield. Then you're looking at Buonanotte. He's a decent potential option there at 5 million. You may want to just cheap it out with Dibbling. That's completely fair enough, but only 1 goal this season, and when you really need him to come off your bench, you're most likely going to get 1 or 2 pointers, which just isn't good enough in this hectic Christmas schedule. Then you're looking at Semenyo and Kluivert, and I just don't really trust any of them, if I'm being honest. I've lost patience with Semenyo myself. I think against West Ham he can do well, but he needs to show much more. Otherwise, he could be on the chopping block from my own team. So when you're looking at budget midfielders, it's not hunky-dory right now. Maybe Jorginho Rutter or Mitoma at 6.1 million and below. They could be worth investment, but Brighton's fixtures do turn for the worse fairly soon, despite the fact that their long-term fixtures are still quite solid. So I'm going to stick with Morgan Rogers here for the time being, and he's starting every single match for Aston Villa. There will come a time where he's benched, and it could be in the next couple of game weeks in FPL, but more often than not, he's going to start those games, get those returns from time to time, and be a good FPL asset at such a cheap price point. Undoubtedly, one of the biggest regrets I've had all season is selling Isak when he was about to face Liverpool. He was yellow flagged. I discussed holding him in my transfer tips, but I really wanted Saka, and my kind of points chasing in the last couple of weeks has resulted in -4 hits being taken and a lot of points being lost out on. I'm still getting green arrows and doing okay in the grand scheme of things, but it could have been much better if I kept the likes of Isak and shown patience in arguably the second best striker in the Premier League right now. He faces Leicester City at home this week, and despite the manager bounce with Ruud van Nistelrooy, I still think Newcastle can score a lot of goals in this game, and Isak will be at the heart of it. Then it's Ipswich Town away in Game Week 17, and don't be put off by Man United or Aston Villa shortly afterwards. And Newcastle's long-term fixtures are still fairly solid, and Isak is the only Newcastle asset I have a lot of confidence in. Lewis Hall might be more punty, and is kind of just going for that budget defender to fill in the ranks and have that squad depth. But I think Isak is not going to be one of those players. He is one of the best options up front for the captaincy this week and also in the long term. The same goes for Nicholas Jackson. The suspension risk is always a problem. I bought him in Game Week 15 and I'm expecting big things from him, and that's why it's important to have that squad depth. If Jackson gets suspended at any point before Game Week 19, you've got the likes of Morgan Rogers coming off your bench and you're pretty much stacked. Or you might even want to go for your 4th defender here, maybe a Kirkes or Lewis Hall against Ipswich Town in Game Week 17. That is completely fine. So that's why I encourage you to stack your bench if possible. You don't have to be, completely overboard with it and have such a good 15-man squad where you struggle to pick the 11 every single week. and you're going to have a lot of bench points in the process. And look, this could happen from time to time with this squad, but I believe it's enough squad depth necessary for this Christmas schedule, and you've also got a lot of quality in your starting 11. Speaking of which, I'm going to complete this team with a budget option who has been in poor form recently, but Joao Pedro has that high ceiling, and I back him to do very well over the next couple of game weeks. But I understand why some of you might be hesitant in investing in him. You might want to go for Vanelson instead, as Bournemouth have better fixtures until game week 21, and you've also got Cunha, at least for the next 2 game weeks, but I wouldn't invest in Wolves right now. The same goes for West Ham. I like Jared Bowen, and I talked about him a couple of weeks ago, but it's all about timing. I'm not that confident in investing in Bowen right now when he's about to face Bournemouth and Brighton. They aren't the easiest games you'll ever see. So that's the 15-man squad for the wildcard team. Let me now show you the starting 11 and the captaincy, and towards the end, a few small differences if you don't want to go for Isak and Jackson up front. There are no debates about it this week. David Raya in goal at home to Everton makes a lot of sense. I just wouldn't start Fabianski away to Bournemouth. Football is full of surprises. You never know what can happen there, but I think Raya has a much better chance of a clean sheet this week than Joe Gomez, Hall and Van Hecke as a very solid starting 3 in that defensive line, and they've all got home fixtures. The same goes for Salah, Saka, Palmer, and Brennan Johnson's the only away player here with Jackson, Joao Pedro and Isak up front. The bench comprises of Fabianski, Rodgers, Kirkes and Colwill, and I'd probably go for it in that order too. Only 0.1 million left in the bank for me, so this squad costs roughly 103.1 million. So if you can't afford this squad, you may want to downgrade somebody like Raya to Robert Sanchez as one particular example. You might also want to downgrade Johnson to another budget midfielder. So there's a few things you could do, and another thing is one of Jackson or Isak being downgraded, and that's where you can go for a premium defender like Saliba at the back. And originally I was talking about going for Timber and Virgil van Dijk, which meant having a Vanelson up front and this sort of structure. So let's see if Timber is available for the weekend. If he is, I'd probably recommend going for him and Virgil van Dijk as a kind of long-term play in your 11, because with Joe Gomez, that's more of a 4 to 5 week punt. And as much as I like Saliba, he's a quality player with goals in back-to-back games against Fulham and Man United, I still think Timber offers better value for money, especially if he plays as the right back. And who knows with Gabriel, it looks like it's a muscle problem. That's what was hinted by Mikel Arteta in his Tuesday press conference. So he will be a major doubt against Everton at home. But if he is available in the coming weeks, he might be worth holding on to because of that bullet header he has and the aerial presence he's got in every single set piece. So that's pretty much the best wildcard team. All that's left to discuss is the captaincy. And I'd favour Mohamed Salah right now with Palmer as the vice. The other options include Saka and Isak, but you could arguably go for any single one of these attackers, Brennan Johnson, Jackson, and Joao Pedro, but I would stick to the big 3 in the midfield, Salah, Palmer and Saka in that order, and Isak as a very nice differential against Leicester City. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Our aim is to get this to the 200 likes and to keep on pushing towards 31,000 subscribers and beyond. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks, the Discord server, FPL League, Drafthound, as well as Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It goes a long way to support my channel. I wish you all the best of luck for Gameweek 16 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.